So long as he's alive, I tremble. I shake. I'm the king, and yet I shake. Will no one rid me of this meddlesome priest? A priest who mocks me? Are there all around cowards like myself? Are there no men left in England? It's my heart. My heart. It's too fast. It's too...
You Saxon, you traitor, you dog. For the name of Jesus and the protection of the church, I am ready to embrace death.
Knights, we can depart. I don't think you'll be getting back up.
Hello, I'm Father Michael Kosicki, University Chaplain at Kent University and Assistant Professor of Theology and Philosophy in the College of Humanities, Education, and Social Sciences. Thomas Becket, well, he was given to Henry II of England. Henry was a Norman who became king at a young age. He was 21 years old and became king. And it was at the conclusion of a civil war called the Anarchy. And the king asked Archbishop Theobald, the Archbishop of Canterbury, for for someone who would be a clerk, or say clerk in American English, someone who would be able to help him administer, and someone who was a good administrator. And the Archbishop gave him Thomas, who was a deacon. That's someone who's prepared to be a priest, but he's only in the first level of holy orders where he can give blessings and preach the gospel. So he was given to Henry. They became fast friends, and Henry named him Chancellor, which would be the most important office in the realm because he handled all the king's business, wrote the royal charters and decrees, and therefore he had the ear of the king and he had the voice of the king. So Thomas and Henry became very good friends. While Thomas was a deacon, he kind of lived a lavish secular lifestyle with the king. They hunted, they rode horses, they indulged in luxury. And then some years later, Archbishop Theobald died, and Henry had to have a say in the appointment of the next Archbishop of Canterbury. Now, the position of Archbishop of Canterbury was the senior clergyman in the English Church. It was the first diocese established in England, and that archbishop was considered the most important. He was sort of first among equals, and in some way even exercised authority over the bishops and priests of England. So Henry II decided to have Thomas named Archbishop of Canterbury. Thomas did not want this, but Henry wanted it because he thought he could use Thomas to exert the king's control over the church, and therefore be able to appropriate church property and exercise control over the church. Thomas begged him not to do this, but Henry did it anyway. Thomas was ordained a priest, and a day later he was consecrated bishop and therefore named Archbishop of Canterbury. And one of the first things he did was tell the king he no longer wished to be chancellor. He said he could not be chancellor and archbishop at the same time. The king wanted to do both, so that basically the archbishop worked for the king. Thomas refused, and that began their parting of ways. The king was bitterly opposed to Thomas's decision. Thomas worked to defend the rights of the church in terms of property, in terms of the right to exercise legal proceedings against clerics who had committed crimes. which in those days would be tried by the church court, not by the king's court. And so there began a great falling out. The king tried to get Thomas removed. He wanted Thomas to resign. Eventually, Thomas fled to France. After some years, there was a bit of a reconciliation. Thomas was invited back to England. But one of the first things he did was remove from office a couple bishops who had sided with the king, and even placed a crown on whom Henry wanted as his successor as King of England when he would be gone. And that's a privilege reserved to the Archbishop of Canterbury. So that's when Henry made his famous line at Christmas dinner, "Who will rid me of this turbulent priest?" And in 1170, Thomas Becket, Archbishop of Canterbury, in his cathedral, was put to death by those knights who came thinking they would get a royal reward for taking the king's frustration into their own hands. He's revered as a saint, as someone who's committed to his role, celebrated in literature. In fact, in the 20th century, the great play Murder in the Cathedral by T.S. Eliot gives a wonderful presentation of Archbishop Thomas Becket in those last 5 days of his life. From what I understand, the public reacted first when he returned to England from exile in France. There was a great outpouring of affection for him, which was one of the things that angered Henry II, because he thought the people revered Thomas in a way that was reserved only for the king. They lined the streets when he was traveling through on his way back to Canterbury, when he was visiting other dioceses. They lined up and cheered for him, grateful to have him back. So it was a great fondness for him, great public esteem and respect and love for Archbishop Thomas Becket. And so when he died, originally those knights thought by putting Thomas to death, they would get a reward from Henry because they would have gotten rid of this troublesome priest. But what ended up happening was it was a scandal that was so widely spread throughout not just England, but throughout, if you want to say in those days, Christendom, throughout all of Christian Europe. The death of Thomas by knights who served the king was a huge scandal for Henry. It actually weakened him for a while, that he actually did a public penance for the killing, where he went to where they buried Thomas, and he did a public penance for the killing of Archbishop Thomas. So yes, there was a great public reaction, and they mourned, and because of that, he was, to this day, he's revered as a martyr. In other words, someone who is put to death because of the hatred of the faith. So he's revered as a martyr, and therefore, right away, there were pilgrimages to the shrine where he was buried. In fact, one of the great classics of English literature, the early English literature, is the Canterbury Tales of Geoffrey Chaucer. And it's not about Becket, but it's about the framework is pilgrims traveling in a group to Canterbury to visit the shrine of Becket, and the tales they tell when they're at the Tabard Inn along the way. So just already in the culture, there was already this strong sense of, well, you couldn't make it to Rome where St. Peter was buried. You definitely couldn't make it to the Holy Land, but you could go to Canterbury to visit the tomb of the martyr, Archbishop Thomas. So he was revered as a martyr, as a saint, as a very beloved pastor.